Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for dialing in to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the advertising, arts, and media industry in Australia. So, we're going to be moving through a fair bit of content. There'll be a lot of data that we'll be running through as well. So, please don't feel like you have to write everything down. We will be sending out a copy of the presentation notes, and we'll also send you a copy of the recording as well. It'll either come through later this afternoon or perhaps tomorrow morning. So, if you need anything in addition to today's session, please let me know. I'll show you some other ways that you can collate information. So we'll go through and work through that in a moment. But for those of you who haven't met me before or haven't dialed into a webinar before, my name is Narelle Stefanac. I'm the National Client Training Manager at SEEK, and we look at three main areas when we're talking about making efficiencies throughout the whole recruitment and placement function. So the very first part of that funnel is really to be able to position people as subject matter experts. If you can understand what's happening within the market historically, where the market is projected to grow in terms of employment in the future, and also what the real-time supply and demand mechanisms look like, that's what's really going to help you set your conversations apart from others. So we're going to be focusing in on that component today. The other two components really break down sourcing strategy, so whether that be advertising or talent searching through a headhunting style of mechanism or marketing mechanism, but we're not really going to delve into those in a lot of detail today. I'll sort of flick to them, talk about those two sourcing strategies throughout, but if you want more detail in particular on those topics, please let me know. We can take it offline. If you want to reach out to me post today's session, you can do so via my email. You can tweet me if you prefer, but we also run a lot of blog articles on the insight.seek.com.au website. So register for that, stay across it. There's lots of things that will come up from time to time through that channel. If you'd like to ask questions throughout today's session, just type them away for me. We're going to have about 50 of you on the line, so I prefer you type them in. That way I can pause in between screens and just answer as we go. But I will park 5 minutes at the end as well to answer any questions that you might have when we're finished. Now, if you are interested in getting industry insights across any of our classifications, we've been running these for just over 12 months and we've covered a fair few. So if there's a few that you're interested in, let me know. We'll make sure we flick you through the findings for any of these. These have all been covered in the last 12 months or so. In terms of what we've got left for the year, we're still looking at sport and rec, science and technology, consulting and strategy, that's sort of farming and agriculture area, and also CEO general management level. So they'll be coming. If you're interested in those, let us know. We'll get you an invitation for them as well. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, there's a fair few things. The very first thing that we like to look at is some independent data. So we use the Department of Employment's Job Outlook survey to be able to rationalise, I guess, what we've seen in terms of employment movements, so what's been happening over the last 5 to 10 years, and also what they project the growth to look like across the different occupational groups that they're after, and then we rationalise it across the SEEK data as well. So we like to use some independent data just to give us a bit of a test to make sure that we understand how the market at an aggregate level is actually performing and where we may see potential pressure points within the ecosystem. So I'm going to step you through some of the key findings for advertising, arts and media, and also show you where I get them from, because I think there's some information in this live portal that will be updated in the next 2 weeks that you're going to want to get your hands on. So I'm going to show you how to get into it, how to use it, where to go, how to stay across it. The Department of Employment only updates data annually though. What we'll show you next in the next 3 categories across supply and demand, salary and behaviours is all SEEK-driven data. So what do we know about the real-time supply and demand of candidates? What sort of salary offerings are out in the marketplace? What sort of behaviours are candidates exhibiting online? And then how do we actually transform that into something that is going to help shape the sourcing strategy that we choose to deploy? So yeah, fair bit of detail. I'm going to jump straight into things though. If you do want to ask questions, by all means do so. And for those of you who have just arrived, we will be sending you a copy of all these slides. There's a fair bit of data, so don't feel like you have to scribble everything down. All right, so we're going to have a look at some information from the Department of Employment. And I like using this as a source because it gives us a really good litmus test for what's been happening over the last period, and what are the projections, what are the forecasts that they're expecting based on some really long-term trend analysis. So the first thing that we know is that it's been bouncing around a lot. Okay, the last 5 years in particular, we saw the fall off through 2009, 2010, 2011, the impacts of the GFC. But then we saw it recover in 2012. We definitely did see a bit of a rebound, but that softened again in 2013 in terms of total employment numbers across the category. And if we look at that 5 year period from 2009 to 2013, there's actually been a net decline of 11% over that time period. So a lot of people may be finding that in the last year or so, it's been okay to be able to surface candidates. It hasn't been that challenging in some areas. In fact, there's some good talent out there, and you can sort of take your time to sort of move them out of one job and take them into the next. There will be pockets though. Some areas are in stronger growth than others. And the way that the Department of Employment categorises occupations is very different to SEEK. So I've listed out each occupational group at the bottom of the slide. So they talk to things like journalists and other writers, photographers, artistic directors, media producers and presenters. So they've got different labels for the different occupational groups. And what I thought would be useful is to actually show you how candidate supply has moved at a very granular level. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how the market is projected to grow. So even though we've been in decline by 11% over the last 5 years, they are expecting a rebound. They're expecting the entire category to uplift by about 9% over the next 5 years between 2013 and 2018. But where that growth is going to come from is, well, anyone's guess. They've done some projections for us, but majority of it is in growth. Okay, so you can see journalists and other writers, which is the biggest employment category, it's still expecting really healthy growth of around 11%, which in absolute terms is actually quite high. You know, we're talking about another, 2,500 roles potentially created in this space. We're also looking at areas like models and sales demonstrators with 13% increase. So that probably relates very similar to the promotions category in SEEK. So if you're looking for more that temporary promotions category, that's where we're definitely going to see extra growth there as well. But the areas where we're seeing the decline, which I've highlighted just in red at the very bottom or to the far right of the graph, are areas which are more trade-based. So these are more manufacturing style. We've got graphic pre-press trade workers and also photographic developers and printers. So we're definitely seeing that physical printing space. We're seeing some of that soften. And this is sort of what's projected over the next period. Now that should help you in terms of understanding, well, what's going to happen in my particular niche, because this category is quite a broad one. And the conversations that you can start having with hirers is more going to be around, well, we know that it's been a very soft market for the last 5 years. Okay, it's dropped by about 11% net. But what we are anticipating is that that's going to turn around and it's going to flip so that candidates are going to have a little bit more say. You're going to have less control. So how you were recruiting 5 years ago may not work 5 years into the future. So we need to start thinking, do we need to speed up our processes? Do we need to be a little bit more flexible around the types of candidates we're looking for? Do we need to challenge the hiring manager around their wish list on what the type of candidate, their perfect person would look like? How are we going to sort of manage their expectations in the very sort of first aggregate level? The other piece of information that I've got for you, which can be useful if you're really trying to just get your head around the entire segment, is this demographic profiling. Now, this doesn't actually get published in this way or this format through the Department of Employment. They do individual one pages, and I'll show you how to access those in a moment. But I've rolled them up into a table just to give you a bit of a comparison between the different roles and the different skews between, are they male dominated or female dominated? And these first sort of 5 clusters are very much male dominated areas: journalists and other writers, photographers, artistic directors, media producers, presenters, music professionals, film, television, radio. Okay, this sort of stuff is skewed towards the male demographic. So if you're wanting to increase your female participation rates in these areas, it may be thinking about, okay, well, are we going to potentially isolate really good candidates simply because of gender? Or if we do need to focus on it, what do we need to be thinking about? Okay, how would we articulate, use language differently? What would we be flexible on? Okay, so if you look at all of these here, these more skilled roles, so journalists and other writers, photographers, artistic directors, they're all degree qualified. Would we consider someone who wasn't degree qualified if it would help us get a better gender balance? Okay, what's more important to us? The other thing too is that they're all predominantly skewed towards full-time, except for music professionals, as you could imagine. Would we consider part-time work arrangements? So these are the sorts of questions that this information can help you formulate so that you're having the right dialogue with those hiring managers up front before you even start working on what that sourcing strategy looks like. The other thing to consider as well is, let's say you're looking for someone who is in that promotions area and you're saying, I want someone that's been to at least year 12 or is degree qualified. Well, that's not the majority. Okay, the majority are only year 10 and year 11. That's where they would have exited school. So are we going to restrict the volume of candidates based on the education qualification? Gemma's asked, do you know which category digital falls into? Digital sits across a few. So digital can come up in IT. It can also come up in architecture and design and architecture, because there's like graphic design that sits under there. And there's a little bit under marketing in terms of, it depends on what capability of digital you're after, but it can also come up in that space as well. So if you want all of those industry insights, we've done all of those classifications, so we can always shoot them through for you also. Right, so we've also got some more areas here, which are the final, 6 that we saw in the initial graph, but this also steps through the demographic profile of these candidates. Some of the areas are too small for them to get sample sizes on. So these last two that are in decline, the graphic pre-press trades workers and also the photographic developers and printers, there just wasn't enough data available for them to be able to publish in regards to education profile. So anytime that occurs, that's been posted there, but it does give you a really good sense of what is the norm or the operating norm look like, and we've also published what the national averages are. So it might even be you might be recruiting in this space for the first time and you're just not familiar with it. And if that's the case, then it's being able to quickly look at it, get an idea of what the demographic profile looks like, and then how easy or difficult it may be to recruit for based on projected employment growth. All right, so now we're going to move into, actually, I'm going to show you where you get all this information from before I move into the next section. So I'm going to skip out to this website here, which should come up on your screen as joboutlook.gov.au. You should be able to see it in the URL string at the top of your screen. Now, the reason why I love this website is because it's a portal. So you can start typing in a job title into this field here. So say we wanted an editor. And if you hit search, it'll then come through and it'll find out where do those words exist, where do we think they should be published. So there's authors and book script editors, film, television, radio and stage directors. There's a whole range of different ones where that role title would sort of cluster into. But let's say that we're looking at authors and book and script editors. It then takes you through to this landing page, which you should have now. And if you've never had to recruit for this category before, you may not be familiar with the sorts of tasks that they'd be required to do on a daily basis. So if you scroll down, it'll actually break out all of the tasks for you. Now, this can be handy if you're an organisation and you're trying to create a PD for this role, or if you're a recruiter and you've never had to recruit for it and you really need to get your head around it quickly. So I always like to move just down into that overview section of tasks and then think about, okay, do they have to develop ideas and themes for written work such as novels, plays, musicals, right? It's just a really good way to sort of formulate your thinking around what the occupation is. The other thing that I love about this one is if you go across to these reports and links on this little navigation bar here, it gives you a PDF link. Okay, so you should see that in a second. This PDF link, what it does, when you click on it, it provides you with that overview. So where I did the demographic profiling and put it into a table, they've published it in a one-pager with some narration. So it gives you an idea of if the occupation is large or small and how it's projected to grow, what the percentage of female versus male is, what the educational profile is, what sort of earnings they have, but it also gives you this 10-year trending. So it tells you how many people have been employed in this category over the longer term. And they update these one pages every 12 months. I've spoken to Department of Employment. They're expecting these to be published on the 29th of May. So if you want to get all the latest data, I'd probably come back first week of June and get all the latest insights on each of these PDFs. But you can easily move through them, store them, keep them. But at the moment, the projection is off actual employment numbers in 2013 and projection through to 2018. The next set of data that'll come through is 2014 to 2019 projection. So keep an eye on that one. The other part I love is this industry search feature here. So if you click on industry search, it provides you with a link through to the labour market information portal. And this portal is really good if you want geographical splits, regional splits. And you need to want to play with data. Okay, if you don't like data, you probably won't like these because they're all Excel spreadsheets. But the idea here is that you can have a look at those projections not only at an industry level, but you can also look at it at a skill level. And they also do down below these regional level splits as well. This data obviously is still 2014 to 2018. They're yet to release the 2019 ones. They should come in the next 2 weeks. But the ones up the top here are the latest data sets. And they're really good at just providing a top-line view of what's happening in the industry as a whole. So I'd be downloading this report in particular, the Industry Employment Projections Report. It's just a Word document. It sums up all of the major movements that they're predicting to occur across the Australian workforce by the top industries. So, out of the 19 industries that they look at, there's about 17 that they're expected to go into growth mode. And then it splits out which are the big movers and shakers and why. So it just gives you a really good idea of what that lens looks like. I love this report. I'd absolutely hack it apart, work out what it means to you. But what it does is it provides you with a really good taste for what the market is expected to do and have really high-level conversations with your hiring managers as a result. Okay, so lots of data in there for you. All right, I'm going to move back. And for those of you who have just joined us, we're going to send you all this data. So you'll have it probably, I dare say, tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for it. All right, we're going to move into the real-time supply and demand because as insightful as the Department of Employment information is, it is fairly static. Once you get it, it doesn't get updated for another 12 months. So we're really working off these really long-term projections, which, can be impacted by economic conditions, global conditions. There's a lot of stuff that can come into play. So what we keep a close eye on is this real-time supply and demand. Okay, we know how much demand is out there for candidates because of the volume of job ads that are being posted, and we look at that on a trending basis and a month-by-month basis. We also look at the supply of active and passive candidate pools, and we monitor their engagement with job ads. But then we also bring it right down to a conversion metric. Okay, so when candidates convert from being passive to active, so where they're actually physically applying for your roles. And we capture that in a graph that's called our average applications per ad index. That's what you're looking at on the screen now. So what we do is we index it from lowest applications per ad to the highest average applications per ad. Now, it's not a linear graph, it is an index, so it shows you on a real scale what the gaps are between, say, the lowest end and the highest end. So you can sort of work it out. Like if you said, all right, well, let's say media strategy, planning and buying, I get around 3 applications per ad, then you would assume that for photography, you're probably getting about 10 times that, so maybe up to 30 applications per ad. So you can sort of see where these scales kick from being really low supply into, say, more moderate supply through here, into high supply of candidates through here. So knowing all of that, your sourcing strategy would change as a result. And the reason why we don't publish absolute applications per ad is mainly for competitive reasons. We just don't like to publish it, but we're happy to share this scalable model with you so you can sort of expect or anticipate where you may get low applications versus high. Now, what this does is it helps you move the dial on the conversation with your hiring managers. So we already know that for some roles, they're going to be in growth mode. We know that they're going to be challenging to resource for, or more challenging than they have been in the past. But now we want to understand, well, if we were to do it today, where would we feel the real pinch points? And if, say, you were looking for a manager in this category, then that's the second most difficult role to resource for nationally. And that's what I'd be saying to the hiring managers. Okay, it's great that we want a manager. It's an awesome role, but managers are the second most difficult role to resource for in the country. So how flexible are we going to be here? What are we going to do differently? What are we going to communicate? Are we going to advertise and just wait for candidates to apply? Or do we want to be more proactive and do we want to search for talent? Okay, when you sign a contract with Seek, you can do both. Okay, you don't have to just advertise. You can also use our talent search capability. And if you use them together, they're really super powerful, but ultimately it's a way for you to take control back. Now, if you're not familiar with the talent search component to your contract, definitely let us know. It's relatively new, but it's just an extension of your job ad, but it gives you the control to determine who you want to see your ad, who you want to grab and contact yourself rather than just waiting for them to apply. And that's where I'd be using that sort of strategy, especially for those really hard to source candidates. So you're not just sitting there waiting. On the flip end, when we're looking at areas like event management, promotions, photography, well, you know what? Promotions is actually one of the areas that's in high growth. So even though we might be getting a high supply of candidates, I'd be thinking they're going to move quick. So do I just want to wait for candidates to apply, or again, would I rather search for them, connect with them straight away and convert them? Okay, because they're going to move quickly to their next opportunity. Or, at the tail end photography, would I want to use more screening capability? So I can screen out the candidates that I don't think are going to be relevant, so I can create more efficiencies with my model. So I can get to the right talent fast. I might want to see all the applications, but I actually want them to complete some sort of criteria so that I understand who's going to be the better candidates over the weaker candidates. So it's really thinking up front rather than going through the process and then hoping it works and then having to come back and do it again. Now, the other thing to consider is if we know it's going to be tough to find candidates, you probably want to know, where are they? Okay, if you're looking for a manager and you're in Victoria, you may struggle, okay, because a lion's share of candidates are actually in New South Wales. And in fact, there's more candidates in Queensland than there are in Victoria that are physically looking at ad copy. Okay, so we look at this graph. What it's showing is both the active and the passive audience, not when they do a search, but when they have physically engaged with a summary, so your little short blurb, and clicked on it and moved through to the body of the ad. Okay, so where's the volume of those candidates? Where do they sit? And if you're in Victoria and you're looking for a manager, well, the conversation I'd be having is, well, managers are the second most difficult role to resource for nationally, and the lion's share of candidates aren't based here. They're actually based in New South Wales or even Queensland. So would we consider paying relocation costs? Have we considered what salaries are on offer in those markets? Would we pay a sign-on bonus? What would we do to make sure we get the best talent? Not necessarily just the local talent, but the best possible talent into this role. And all of this thinking, like I said, can be done up front. And that's how I'd start to pull the levers to really broaden out the conversations that you're having with hiring managers. The next component is really looking at that salary element. I mentioned it just a second ago. Are we going to be competitive enough? And the best way to be able to measure your competitiveness from a salary perspective is to look at what the offerings are out in play. Not necessarily what candidates get paid, but what are they being attracted by? Okay, who's offering what? What does that look like? And are we sitting at least in the ballpark? And if we look across this category, management does attract the highest level salary. So they're anywhere between, say, 81 to 105,000. Now, if you're only wanting to pay 70 grand a year, then again, I'd be challenging that internally. One, can we move the dial on that? Yes or no? It's a pretty straightforward question. Some businesses will say no. We can't move the dial on that. So it might be, well, the language that we use needs to change because we can't necessarily, or we might not want to attract a highly skilled, highly experienced manager into this role because the role that we have, even though it's a manager type, it's more junior and therefore attracting a more junior wage. Okay, so we need to be really careful about the language we use. Or it might be that, well, let's focus on our benefits. We might not have a very good salary, but we have great benefits. Let's focus in on those. Let's talk about the fact that you get a car park and you get a car allowance, you get gym membership, we have healthcare subsidies, we pay extra super. What is it that you actually do to really compensate for the lack of salary or take-home earnings? That sort of stuff is where you can move the dial, and it needs to be articulated to really position you well within that competitive nature. So I'm going to wrap up with some search behaviours, and I know I said I'd park 5 minutes at the end for questions, but I think we're going to run out of time. I'm happy for you guys to start firing questions at me though. If you have any, fire away. So in terms of search behaviours, I think the biggest thing to consider is the fact that candidates are using mobile technology. And I'm sure that won't come as a surprise to anyone, but the surprise is how much and how quickly it has moved. 5 years ago, it was less than 2% of our overall traffic was via a mobile device. Today, it dominates our search behaviour. Okay, it's more than 59% of all visits to Seek are now via mobile. So if you've never experienced the end-to-end journey of what your ad feels like to a candidate through a mobile device, I really encourage you to do it. Go in, search, find your ad. How does it look? How does it feel? Do you want to read it, or does it look like a mess? Have you got your brand in there somewhere? Have you got some video content in there as well to make it dynamic? When you click apply, is it easy or is it tough? Do I have to pinch the screen? How easy is it for me to complete my application on a mobile device? Just thinking about all these things, because candidates are now choosing mobile as their main way to search and engage. We also want to make sure that we're making it really simple for them. In terms of what buckets they're using, it's starting to shift. We're seeing that keyword is starting to overtake classification in terms of relevance for candidates. So they're finding more and more relevant matches through you entering a keyword. But that keyword typically is skewed to a job title. So either a job title, you can also see in this category, it's also skewed towards a skill or an industry, okay, because it's quite a broad category. So thinking about, are our job titles making sense? Are we using really fancy titles that no one would ever type in, or are we using real titles and terms that candidates would associate themselves with? Are we being too fancy? So thinking about these sorts of things, and when you go to use keywords, you don't have to keyword load. And what I mean by that is, if you know that you've got, say, editor is your keyword, you don't need editor 20 times in your ad. The way that we count it is, does editor exist? Yes or no. If editor exists, give it a point. If editor doesn't exist, don't give it a point. Okay, we don't say you've put it in 20 times, so give it 20 points. It's still a yes-no question. Does it exist? Yes or no. 1 point only. So don't keyword load. Really think about the language that you're using. Write your ads with really rich information that's very specific, but they make sense to the market. Now, I've got a couple of questions. I'll come back to those, Ash. I'll just finish with these takeouts and I'll wrap up in a moment. So I guess the key things that I really want you to take out of today is thinking about, how do you blend the big aggregate market information that's happening? What do we know about the entire marketplace? How does advertising, arts and media sort of sit into that? Any of the occupational groups that you specialise in, how do they all fit? How have they been trending for the last 5 years? Well, majority have been in decline. And how are they looking to project to trend in the next 5 years? And well, the majority are looking to increase. So what does that mean? How does that impact you? If you're going to recruit for them today, what sort of supply and demand trends are out there that are going to influence the way that you go about managing the hiring manager's expectations, managing the candidate's expectations, really thinking about what sourcing strategies you use. Okay, so what we want you to be is that subject matter expert right there from the outset, so that when you're consulting with the hiring manager, you're actually providing them with really useful information that will help you set up for the best recruitment strategy possible. And no one likes reworking a role, right? You get the job order, you don't want to have to run it and then loop all the way back to the beginning and do it again just simply because you've missed the mark. Okay, you didn't allow for candidates to move quickly or be counter offered, or that you're going to get inundated by candidates on the other end. We sort of want you to have that thinking up front and then come up with the best sourcing strategy and really thinking about that sourcing strategy. In the last couple of years, we've moved from being just simply a job board, but you also have a search capability, and you can also choose whether you do the search or the ad posting. You don't have to do both. Okay, you can actually break those two things apart. So if you're not familiar with that talent search component, which is relatively new, please let us know. We'll take it offline. But if you couple it with your job ad, so if you can imagine you post an ad and then you go and search for talent, it's just an extension of your job. It just gives you more control. If you want to completely break it away and not run an ad and just do search only, then we have a different solution there. But really think about how you can really pull this as a lever for you. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I've got a couple of questions I'm going to answer now, but if you need to fly, I'll let you go. So thank you for joining us, and good luck with your sourcing strategies for 2015. Thanks, everyone. All right, so Ash, we've got some questions here. Have you noticed any recent trends in the programmatic media buying from Seek's perspective? Geez, that's a very niche, detailed question for me, Ash. Programmatic media buying, I'm not close to that category. What I can do though is we can trend out two things. One, we can trend out candidate behavior, so we can see whether or not, if we look through buying behavior, so media buying is a sub-classification for us, but programmatic is a niche within that. We won't have the niche, but at a top level media buying, we can trend out supply of engaged candidates. Okay, and we can do that over, I think it's like a 6-year time period, so we can see how that's gone up or down over time. We can also trend out the demand for those candidates as well. And it's about the same period, 6-year period, and we run an index of ad volume, and that trends out as well. So we can start to see if one line's going up and one line's coming down, or vice versa. And that gives us an idea of this intersection of candidates and whether or not it's going to become increasingly more difficult or easier. So we can absolutely look at that. The other thing that I think we may be able to do is, and I'll have to double check if our data goes down to this granular level, but we may be able to slice it out by state. So if you're interested in a particular location or state-based location, let me know, and I'll see if we can also do a state-based split of that data for you. There was also another question in terms of candidates. There seems to be a general lack of these candidates in terms of those programmatic media buying specialists. What I would suggest in that instance, Ash, is it sounds like you have a really clear niche of who you're trying to target. What would be the best solution for you is looking at the premium talent search solution. So what that does is, rather than going in and posting an ad on Seek, we have another area which is a search area. So when you go into the search area, instead of, it's like a job search, but what your short descriptions look like are candidates, right? So we've got 3.2, I think it's up to 3.5 million candidates who are in that candidate profile space that are saying, hey, we're happy to be contacted if an opportunity arises that meets our needs. But if you put in those really niche search terms, and we can show you with Boolean search and that sort of thing, then it can return and show you how many candidates match that. And you can look not only within your geographical area, but also across all of Australia and across the entire database. So there's also others where we've got candidates that are international candidates. It's a smaller subset, but it gives you transparency over all of those candidates. It also tells you things like how much money they want, where they're currently living, where they're willing to move to for the right role, how much notice they need to give. I think that might give you better transparency in real time of those candidates. I mean, the data would be great. fine, we can provide you with the data and that'll give you insight, but it actually won't give you the answer. I think the answer is probably more around the premium talent search is the better solution. So if you're not familiar with that, let me know. I'll hook you up with your account manager and they'll be able to have a conversation with you. All right, guys, I think that's all the questions for today. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you again for dialing in, and we'll send through a copy of the presentation tomorrow for you. So thanks again, and good luck with your sourcing strategies for the remainder of the year. Thanks, guys.